Some days she helped him around the house in ways he could not understand. She moved gracefully, lifting objects with a gentle precision that seemed almost magical. James watched in awe, feeling a mixture of wonder and admiration. Yet, despite her strange powers and alien origins, there was a fragility about her. Sometimes she would pause, her glowing eyes clouded with sorrow, and stare at the ceiling or the floor, as if listening to memories no one else could hear. James learned to respect her silences. He did not push her to speak. He simply sat nearby, reading or working, knowing that his quiet presence mattered more than words. And sometimes when she spoke, it was in fragments of her own language, humming softly, almost like music. He didn't understand it, but it felt like a song of longing, of homesick sorrow and unspoken hope. One evening, James decided to cook dinner for her. He had tried cooking before, but he was never confident. Now he found himself carefully chopping vegetables, measuring spices, and setting the table with extra care. Lyra watched silently, her eyes flicking between the ingredients in James's hands. When the meal was ready, she took a small bite, closed her eyes, and whispered, "It is comforting. It is good." Her voice, soft and hesitant, carried a weight that made his chest ache. Not because she had complimented him, but because he realized how rare moments like this must be for her. For someone who had traveled across galaxies, seen wonders and horrors beyond imagination, a simple meal prepared with care could bring comfort. He felt a deep, unexpected connection, the knowledge that simple human kindness could reach even an alien heart. Night times were the hardest for Lyra. She would sit quietly by the window, staring at the stars. Sometimes James joined her, placing a hand on the small of her back in a gesture of support. "Do you miss home?" he asked softly one night. Her glowing eyes turned to him, filled with a sadness that cut through the quiet. "Every day," she admitted. "Yet, this place, it gives me peace. It is strange. I feel safe, near your heartbeat." James felt a lump in his throat. The house had been empty for so long. He had learned to live alone, to find comfort in silence. And yet, in those moments, he realized that the warmth of connection, the simple act of being present, was something far more powerful than he had ever imagined. They began to share small routines. Lyra would help him water his plants, touching each leaf delicately, marveling at their fragile life. She would sit with him while he read, humming softly when a passage resonated with her, and he would watch her, fascinated, trying to understand the world through her eyes. But despite these moments of quiet joy, James could see the sadness she carried like a shadow. There were nights when she would sit curled in a chair, glowing faintly, staring into the distance. She did not speak, but he felt her pain, the longing for a place, a world, or being she could never return to. One evening he finally said, "You don't have to carry it alone." Her eyes met his, wide and luminous, and for a moment he thought she might cry. I have wandered so long, yet you stay. You do not leave." "I won't," he replied simply. "You don't have to be alone anymore." And in that moment something shifted. Not only had she found safety, but James realized that he too had found something he had been missing for years. Lyra's presence had taught him that life could be more than routines and silence. That even the smallest moments, a shared meal, a quiet conversation, a hand on the shoulder, could transform existence into something meaningful. In the weeks that followed, their lives intertwined like the branches of a tree reaching toward sunlight. The house was no longer just James's home, it had become theirs, and every small moment they shared, whether watching the wind, drinking coffee, or simply sitting in silence, carried the weight of trust, care, and a bond that neither of them fully understood, but both cherished. Life with Lyra had grown quiet and beautiful, yet the peace was fragile. The world outside James's small house was not always kind to strangers, and especially not to someone like her. Lyra, with her glowing silver skin and luminous eyes, could not blend in. She carried the look of another world, a beauty and strangeness that drew attention and fear. It began with whispers. At first, James barely noticed them. His neighbors would glance toward the house, their expressions tight, voices low but sharp. "Who is that?" one would mutter. "Is that safe?" another would ask. Lyra walked through the yard as she pleased, planting seeds in the small garden James had started for her, and the reactions were instant. Windows would close, doors would latch, and hushed tones followed her wherever she went. Then came the confrontation. One late afternoon, while Lyra was watering the plants, a man from the neighborhood approached, his face red with anger. He shouted, before James could even step forward, "You, what is that thing doing in our neighborhood? You can't just bring monsters here." James felt his blood boil, but he stayed between the man and Lyra. "She's not a monster," he said firmly. "She's my guest, she's staying here," the man sneered, pointing at Lyra. "Guest? That's not a human. You're inviting danger into our homes, you have no idea what she is." Lyra stayed perfectly still, her luminous eyes lowering to the ground. She did not fight, did not shout. But James could see her shoulders trembling, slightly. He realized how exhausting it must be for her, to be judged, feared, and hated simply for existing. "Leave her alone," James said, raising his voice this time. "Or go through me." The man spat on the ground, shaking his head. "You're crazy, I'll be back, you can't hide this forever." And with that he stormed off, leaving James tense and Lyra still seated, glowing faintly in fear and sadness. James knelt beside her. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "I shouldn't have let this happen." Lyra shook her head, though her glow dimmed slightly. "No, it is not your fault. It is humans. Many fear what they do not understand. I expected this." Even though she said it calmly, James felt a surge of anger at the world outside, at the small-mindedness and cruelty she had to endure. Yet he also felt something else, an even stronger determination. He would protect her no matter what. That night she curled up in the corner of the living room, glowing faintly. James sat nearby, keeping watch. He could hear her quiet sighs, small tremors of the sorrow she carried inside. "I bring you trouble," she whispered almost to herself. "I should leave before it grows worse." James shook his head. "No," he said firmly. "You stay. This is your home too. I won't let anyone chase you away. Not you, not now, not ever." For the first time since she arrived, Lyra's eyes filled with tears. She tried to hide them, but James saw. She had traveled across stars, faced loneliness he could not imagine, and yet here in a small human's house she had found someone willing to stand up for her, and that simple act of protection meant more than he could ever explain. Days passed and the tension outside did not completely fade. Neighbors avoided their eyes, whispered behind closed doors, and some even left threatening notes. But inside the house, something had changed. Lyra began to relax, trusting James more fully than before, and James in turn began to understand the depth of the bond forming between them. It was not just shelter she sought. It was someone who saw her, who valued her, who would not abandon her when the world turned cold. One evening, as they sat together watching the sun dip behind the horizon, Lyra finally spoke with a fragile smile. "I am grateful. You protect me not because you must, but because you choose to. That is rare among humans." James felt his chest tighten. "I don't know why it matters so much," he said quietly. "But I can't let you face the world alone. Not you." And in that small, fragile moment, they both realized something powerful. The world could be cruel, fearful, and unkind. But inside a home, with care and trust, two beings from different worlds could create a sanctuary. A place where judgment, fear, and loneliness could be held outside the door. A place where even an alien could finally feel safe. Though the conflict had begun and the world outside remained uncertain, James and Lyra understood one truth. Home was not just a house, and companionship was not just presence. They were each other's courage, each other's hope, and each other's reason to keep believing that even when the universe was cold, kindness could still survive. The tension outside the house had been growing for weeks, but James never expected it to escalate, like that night. It was late, the kind of night when the wind whistles through the trees and shadows stretch long across the lawn. Lyra was sitting by the window, her silver skin glowing softly in the dim moonlight. She stared out at the street, her eyes reflecting both fear and longing, as if she were waiting for something, or someone. James had been reading, but he could feel the unease in the air. There was a heaviness, a warning he couldn't ignore. Then he heard the sound, a rough pounding at the door followed by angry shouts. His heart thudded in his chest. "They're back," he whispered to Lyra, rising to his feet. Lyra did not panic. She stood, calm but tense, her eyes narrowing in preparation. Her glowing fingers flexed slightly, and James felt both awe and fear. He didn't know what she could do, but he knew she was not helpless. It was late evening when the knock came. Not a normal knock, the kind someone makes when they are visiting a friend or delivering a package. This knock was slow, careful, almost hesitant, like the sound of someone unsure if they even had the right door. James, sitting alone in his living room with a cup of tea, froze. His heart skipped a beat. The sound was strange, almost rhythmic, and carried a weight he couldn't explain. He set down his cup and walked to the door, feeling a mix of curiosity and unease. When he opened it, he saw her. At first, he thought he must be dreaming. She was tall, taller than any human he had ever seen, with silver skin that shimmered softly under the porch light. Her eyes glowed faintly, like two lanterns in a fog, and they looked at him with a mix of fear, sadness, and something else he couldn't name. Her hair floated around her shoulders in a way that seemed to defy gravity, changing color slightly as she moved. She didn't speak at first. She just looked at him, and in that look, he felt the loneliness of an entire universe. Finally, she spoke, her voice soft and trembling. "Human, may I share your home for a time?" James blinked. He didn't understand. "Excuse me?" he asked, stepping back slightly. "I need company," she said, her words hesitant, almost fragile. "I am alone, and I desire a place near another heartbeat." For a moment, James thought it was a prank. Maybe some person in costume or a trick from the late-night news he had watched. But her eyes told a story of suffering and longing too real to be fake. They held a quiet plea, like someone lost in the middle of a desert, who had finally seen an oasis. Something inside him softened. Years of living alone had made his house quiet and empty. He hadn't realized how much he missed a presence in his home until now. Somehow, despite the strangeness, he knew he couldn't turn her away. "Come in," he said, stepping aside. His voice sounded firmer than he felt. She hesitated, glancing around as if the house itself was foreign to her. Then slowly, she stepped across the threshold. Her movements were elegant and light, almost like she floated, but there was a fragility to her that made him worry. He closed the door behind her and led her to the living room. She studied everything in silence, the furniture, the pictures on the wall, the warm light of the lamp. She sat down on the sofa with care, folding her long fingers neatly in her lap. James poured her a glass of water. She held it in her hands as if it were a treasure, and when she drank, it was slow, deliberate and almost reverent. "My name is Lyra," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I am from far away, not this world. My ship, it is damaged. I have wandered, lost." James nodded slowly, unsure what to say. He had watched science fiction movies, read stories about aliens, but this was real, sitting in his living room, asking for something he couldn't fully understand. "What do you need?" he asked gently, not wanting to scare her. Her glowing eyes lifted to meet his. "Not food, not tools. I need companionship, a presence, a heartbeat nearby. I am alone. Her words hit him like a punch to the chest. Loneliness. He knew that feeling. He had felt it during nights when his apartment was silent, when the city hummed outside but no one called his name. And now, here was someone not human, someone from a place he could never imagine feeling the same pain. He realized that his small act of opening the door had changed everything. A stranger, an alien from a distant star, had trusted him with her vulnerability. And somehow, in that moment, he felt something new. Responsibility. Compassion. A strange growing warmth in his chest that told him he could not let her be alone. So he sat down across from her, and the silence between them was not awkward, it was alive. Something fragile and beautiful was beginning, just with the sound of two beings sitting in the same room, aware of each other's presence. For the first time in a long while, James felt hope. And for the first time in what seemed like forever, Lyra felt a glimmer of relief, knowing that perhaps in this human's house she had found something she had longed for across the stars. Company. The next morning, James woke to a quiet house. Sunlight streamed softly through the curtains, but it did not reach the corner where she sat. Lyra had chosen a small chair near the window, her glowing skin reflecting the morning light like a silver mirror. She was watching the world outside, cars passing, birds hopping on the lawn, but her gaze was distant, as if she were seeing something far beyond the reach of Earth. James brewed coffee and brought it to the living room, setting it carefully on the small table in front of her. She looked at it with curiosity, tilting her head slowly, and he wondered how strange even the simplest human rituals must look to her. "Coffee?" he asked gently. She studied the cup like it held secrets of the universe. Then, with cautious hands, she touched it and brought it to her lips. The steam curled around her face, and for a moment James thought she might float away into the morning light itself. When she finally spoke, her voice was soft, almost musical. "This warmth, it is comforting." James smiled faintly. "It's simple. Humans like small comforts, things that make life easier." Lyra's eyes softened, a flicker of something almost like a smile appearing. "Your world, it is smaller than mine, yet it holds kindness." That day she moved slowly around the house, touching objects as if she were discovering them for the first time. A rug, a lamp, the photos on the wall, each thing fascinated her. James watched silently, feeling a strange mix of pride and tenderness. It was like hosting someone not just from another place but from another world entirely. Hours passed, and she told him her story. She spoke of a home among the stars, a place where the sky shimmered in colors no human could name, where the oceans were glass and creatures moved with laughter and song. Her language, when she used it, seemed to hum like music, but she spoke to him in careful English, choosing words as if they were fragile things. "I have walked many worlds," she said, "yet I am still alone." James felt a weight in his chest. He understood loneliness, but this was different. This was a creature of light and strength, traveling across galaxies, yet longing for something so simple: companionship. It struck him that even beings who seemed more advanced, more powerful than humans, could share the same heartache. Over the next few days, James began to notice her little habits. She did not eat much, preferring to drink water and observe the Yaoma world. Sometimes she would trace patterns on the window pane, as if reading invisible messages. At night she would sit silently, gazing at the stars, her glowing eyes reflecting a sorrow he could not fully understand. One evening, James finally asked the question that had been pressing in his mind. "Why me? Why this house?" She turned slowly, her eyes wide and luminous. "Because you opened the door. Most would not. Most would have feared me, chased me away, or worse. But you Let me in." James felt warmth rush through him, a strange pride mixed with humility. He had not done anything heroic. He had only acted with kindness, yet in her eyes he saw hope, trust, and even relief. As the days passed, the house felt different. Empty spaces, once echoing with silence, now held a subtle hum. Lyra's presence brought warmth even if she didn't speak much. James realized he looked forward to her quiet company, the way she would sit across from him while he read, or the way her eyes would follow him as he moved around the kitchen. Sometimes, when she thought he was not watching, she would smile, faintly at the smallest things. A leaf falling outside, the sound of a bird, the light reflecting off his coffee mug. It was a small, fragile smile, but it was real. And James knew that in some way they were beginning to trust each other, not just as human and alien, but as two beings sharing the same quiet space in the universe. And yet, he also sensed her sadness lurking behind the glow of her eyes, like a shadow that would not leave. He knew she had wandered far from her home, far from anyone she had loved, and that her journey had only just begun. He wondered how long she would stay, and what it meant to have someone so fragile and extraordinary in his life. Despite the uncertainty, James felt a deep, unexpected bond. For the first time in years, he did not feel alone. And he realized slowly that Lyra had not come to share his house merely for shelter. She had come to share his life in ways he could not yet fully understand. In that quiet house, with morning, light spilling across the floor, two very different beings sat together, learning what it meant to have company, and slowly, what it meant to feel at home. Days turned into weeks, and the presence of Lyra in James's house began to change the rhythm of life. She did not demand much, she did not speak often, yet, just by being there, she filled the empty spaces that had long haunted James's apartment. Mornings became quiet rituals. James would make coffee, and she would sit by the window, her silver skin catching the sunlight in a way that made him stop and stare sometimes. He would glance at her over the rim of his cup and notice the small ways she observed the world. A bird hopping on the lawn, a leaf floating in the breeze, the shadows of clouds moving across the street. Every small thing seemed to mesmerize her, as if she were rediscovering life itself. The door rattled as voices shouted outside, "Get out! You don't belong here. We won't let you stay." James stepped in front of Lyra, placing himself between her and the door. "You'll have to go through me," he said, his voice shaking, but firm. The men outside cursed and pounded harder. Stones hit the windows, cracking the glass. The noise was deafening, and James's hands shook. Lyra stayed behind him, calm, yet glowing brighter with fear, as if her light could shield her from the anger outside. "Leave her alone," James shouted, his voice rising with desperation. "She is not harming anyone." For a moment, it seemed like nothing could stop the chaos. The men yelled, threatening, demanding, fueled by fear and ignorance. But James refused to back down. He thought of her alone, wandering across the stars, seeking kindness, and he could not let anyone hurt her. Not now, not ever. Lyra moved closer to him, resting her hand gently on his arm. The warmth of her touch steadied him, and he realized that in her presence he was stronger than he had ever been. "James, it is okay," she whispered softly. "Do not let anger guide you. Protect with your heart." Taking a deep breath, he faced the street again. "Go. Leave this place now, or you will answer to me," he shouted, louder than before. The men hesitated, surprised by his courage. Eventually they cursed and stomped away, leaving the shattered windows and the tense silence behind. James's chest heaved and his hands trembled from adrenaline. He turned to Lyra, expecting fear, but instead saw something else. Relief, gratitude, and perhaps something deeper, like awe. "You would protect me?" she whispered, her glowing eyes wide with emotion. "Of course," James said, shaking his head, trying to calm the rush of emotions inside him. "That's what friends do. That's what home is for." For the first time, Lyra smiled with warmth that touched her entire being, not just her face. It was a smile of relief, trust, and a fragile hope. She stepped closer, resting her head slightly on his shoulder. James felt the weight of the moment, the danger, the fear, the bond that had grown stronger because of it. The house was quiet again, but the night was not easy. They stayed awake, side by side, listening to the wind and each other's breathing. Words were few, but silence spoke volumes. Lyra's hand remained on his arm, and James realized that she trusted him completely. That trust was not given lightly, and he felt honored, protective, and responsible all at once. In the days that followed, James noticed subtle changes in Lyra. She moved more freely around the house, laughed softly at small jokes, and even helped with cooking in ways that reminded him how extraordinary she was, not just in appearance, but in courage and resilience. But there were still moments when she would pause, staring at the sky, her glowing eyes reflecting sadness and longing for a home she might never return to. James learned that protection was more than standing in front of danger. It was listening, caring, being present, and giving courage through presence alone. And he realized with a mix of pride and wonder that he had never felt more human, more alive, than in these moments of shared trust and vulnerability. For Lyra, the fear of the world was real, but she began to understand something equally real, that even across stars, across worlds, there were beings capable of kindness, courage, and loyalty. She had found it in James. She had found a home. And in the quiet of that small house, after the danger had passed, the alien and the human sat together, hearts beating in unison, learning that even in the darkest nights, connection and trust could light the way forward. The weeks that followed the night of fear brought a quiet transformation to James's house. The threat from outside had faded, but the bond between James and Lyra grew stronger every day. It was no longer simply host and guest. It was two beings from very different worlds learning to share life, comfort, and trust. Mornings began with small rituals. James would make coffee and toast, and Lyra would sit by the window, her silver skin catching the sunlight like liquid metal. Sometimes she would hum softly, a sound that seemed like a song from another universe, and James would feel a warmth in his chest that was unfamiliar but comforting. These moments of quiet togetherness became their shared heartbeat, a rhythm of ordinary life made extraordinary by her presence. Lyra had started exploring the house more freely. She would touch the walls, trace her fingers along shelves, and marvel at the human objects she had once only observed. She was fascinated by the small and simple things, plants, books, even the way sunlight fell through the curtains. James watched her with quiet wonder. He felt like he was seeing life through her eyes for the first time, understanding beauty in the smallest details. They began to share small joys. Lyra learned to help with chores in her own way, using her alien abilities to make tasks easier, but doing them with a care that was deeply human. When she watered the garden, she would pause to admire each tiny sprout, whispering softly to the leaves as if they understood her words. When James cooked, she would sit nearby, watching, commenting, quietly on flavors, ingredients, and smells. They laughed together, sometimes at misunderstandings, sometimes at the simple absurdity of human life. And yet, there were still moments when her sadness surfaced. Late at night, she would sit by the window, staring at the stars. Her glow would dim, and James could see her longing for a place far beyond Earth, for a home she might never return to. He would sit beside her, placing a hand gently on her glowing arm. "You don't have to be alone," he would say softly. "Not here, not now." She would glance at him then, eyes shining, not with the alien light that defined her, but with something deeper, trust, gratitude, even affection. "You are kind," she whispered, "more kind than I ever expected. You care." James smiled, though his chest tightened. He had always considered himself ordinary, a man with a quiet life and few companions. Yet in Lyra's eyes he saw the impact of his simple human kindness. He realized that strength did not always come from weapons or power. Sometimes strength came from patience, compassion, and the courage to stand beside someone when the world was against them. Days turned into weeks, and the house itself seemed alive with the presence of two beings who understood each other without words. Lyra would sometimes mimic human routines, making tea with care, reading the books James had collected, or attempting small crafts that always ended in laughter. James would watch her, fascinated by her alien perspective on simple human joys. Sometimes they would sit in silence, letting the quiet fill the space between them. Those silences were not empty. They were comfortable, filled with unspoken understanding. Lyra had wandered across galaxies, searching for a connection that was not lonely. And in James's small, simple house, she had found it. And James, too, had changed. He had been alone for so long that he had forgotten what it meant to truly care for another being. Lyra's presence reminded him that life was meant to be shared, that companionship was a gift beyond measure. He began to see the world not just as a place of routines and responsibilities, but as a canvas of small joys, laughter and warmth that could be shared with someone else. One quiet evening, as the sun set in colors that reminded Lyra of her distant world, she rested her head on James's shoulder. "I am grateful," she said softly, "for your presence, for your care. You have given me a home." James felt a deep ache of emotion, realizing that the gift she had given him in return was trust and companionship, something he had longed for without knowing. In that simple moment, two beings from different worlds, one human, one alien, understood the power of connection, the depth of empathy, and the meaning of family beyond blood or species. And as night fell, their small house glowed, not just with lamps, but with the quiet light of trust, understanding, and shared hearts. For the first time in years, James felt that he was truly alive. And for the first time since she had arrived, Lyra felt the warmth of a home and the safety of a bond she had thought she might never find again. In the vast universe, where worlds were distant and life often lonely, they had found each other. And in that small house on a quiet street, their shared lives became proof that even the smallest gestures of kindness could bridge worlds, heal hearts, and create a home worth protecting. Months passed, and the small house on the quiet street had become a sanctuary. The world outside still whispered with fear and suspicion, but inside, James and Lyra had built a life together, quiet, steady, and filled with moments that mattered more than anything else. The alien who had once wandered the stars alone now had a home. The human who had lived in solitude for years now had a companion, a friend, and perhaps something deeper, though neither spoke the word. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky with colors neither of them had names for, Lyra stood near the door. Her glowing eyes reflected uncertainty and longing. "James, my ship, it is repaired," she said softly. "My people, they are coming. They will take me home." James felt a hollow ache in his chest. He had known this moment might come. He had known that Lyra could not stay forever. Yet, he could not imagine his life without her presence. The quiet glow of her skin in the morning, the gentle hum she made when reading, the way she looked at him with trust and understanding. "Then, you will leave?" he asked quietly, trying to hide the tremor in his voice.